Welcome back, and those of you who attended last time, welcome in. So the rules of engagement will be the same as the last time, Coco Chanel once said, when you walk out the room, just have a look in the mirror, take one piece of jewellery out. Same kind of thing, I think, with giving a public a question. You rehearse it and then maybe keep it short, and that'll apply to both sides. The recording will be available, so the recording was from last time, will be available, will be uploaded from last Friday. Reese was sick, so I'm glad to see it. And okay, so we'll begin with. I just want to thank Paul, the Vice Chancellor, for again coming back. Really agreed to come back. He's got a lot of things, but as we all would think this is important. So, if I could have the first question from. Now, if you could just talk to the camera. Stan.
So first of all, I notice it's an apology. Thanks very much to Tim. Thanks all for coming to answer the question, but particularly to Tim for such a wonderful explanation. And I now know much more about the issue, I think, than I did a couple of days ago. But my concern is about the reputation of this institution. So given the fact that this centre is due to proceed, and given the fact that this is a controversial character, the co-chair, on the plus side, he has interesting ideas. He's clearly been able to engage with policymakers and others around the world, and I can see some great opportunities. But at the same time, I think many of us feel that our reputation as individuals is bound up with the reputation of this institution, and that reputation could be tarnished if the issue is not managed very carefully. So my question to you is, how do you propose that we manage the reputation of UWA, given the controversies which surround this fellow's so-called academic output?
Well, thanks very much. Is this on? Can everyone? No. Oh, it is. Maybe I'll lift it up a bit. Is that better? Yes, you can hear. Well, James, thank you for that question. It might be helpful if I just set out a couple of elements of the issue, just for clarity at the outset. So two things: one about the centre and its purpose, and another about Bjorn Lomborg's connection with the centre and the university. So you will be aware that the UWA Consensus Centre has been funded by the Australian government to focus on development issues, initially global development issues relating to the post-2015 Global Development Goals of the United Nations. And you will be aware, I expect many people have been to the Copenhagen Consensus Centre website on the post-2015 development goals. You'll be aware that they've identified 18 through a process of talking with policy experts and economists around the world. They've identified 18 key development goals. These are not part of the United Nations agenda at present, but those are the 18 that they have identified, and they've gone out to a lead economist in each case to conduct some meta-analysis on the returns to policy intervention in any of those areas. Then they've gone to usually 2 other academics to critique that initial paper, and then they've gone to stakeholder groups, NGOs and others, to write a commentary on that academic discussion. And all of that is on the website across these 18 areas. I expect you've seen it. It's a transparent process of discussing how governments might respond to major development issues and direct their development funds accordingly. The aim of the centre here is to do similar work, first of all on the post-2015 development goals once they have been established by the United Nations. That's a process, it's currently taking place in the United Nations. The UN has said it will determine its 2016 to 2030 development goals by the end of this year. You'll be aware they have over 1,000 recommendations. They have to whittle those down to a small handful, probably 20 or so. But once a development goal has been set, there is still the issue, how on earth do you devise policy to address the goal? The goal may be to eradicate some communicable disease. It may be to address the challenge of species extinction and the onslaught on biodiversity. It may be getting better educational opportunities for girls and young women in a range of countries. Easier to state the goal, much more difficult to determine what policy you then need to most effectively address the goal. So the Australia Consensus Centre, a major part of its work, particularly for the first 12 to 18 months, would be to address those goals. The UN will define its goals. How then might governments devise real policies to implement them? And that's a really big issue because across the world, particularly in the developed world, of course, governments put many tens, actually many hundreds of billions of dollars a year into a development agenda. So if that money can be well directed, that obviously maximises social good. That's the first bit of the centre. The second bit is then to turn to Australia. We have lots of development opportunities in Australia. Some people say we need to spend more on infrastructure. Indeed, there's a whole group of people, the Australia infrastructure group, would say we need more ports and roads and so on. Others would say, hang on, it's actually the people who matter. We need more investment in education and human capital. Others would say, actually, it's health, and so on and so forth. So, in the end, state and federal governments have a limited resource, and they have to make decisions about how to direct that resource across competing opportunities, and how do they evaluate those opportunities. I think politicians and public servants, we often think that they make those allocations in a perhaps an unscientific and maybe in a terribly politicised and emotional way. It's my understanding that public servants work very hard to try to get good value for the public dollar. And to do that, they look at the evidence and they draw opinions very broadly. So that's the focus of the centre. So it's around development goals, first of all international and then Australian. Let me turn to James, turn to Lomborg. Lomborg has been offered an adjunct position here at the university. Not a member of staff. Adjuncts, you will know, are non-remunerated. They're not members of staff. We have over 1,000 adjunct appointments in the university. A very significant number of adjunct members of staff in the university are not researchers, have no publications, no research output. That's particularly the case in medicine, where we have a lot of clinicians, in law and in business and in architecture, where we have a lot of people who come in and bring their expertise from the professional areas in which they work to contribute towards the university. So he would be an adjunct academic, visiting as many of our academics do, maybe a couple of times a year. He would also be co-chair of an advisory board for the Australia Consensus Centre. It's an advisory board because as a centre it will be drawing on some of the methodology and particularly some of the existing connections with a broad range of economists across the world that the Copenhagen Consensus Centre has developed. So those are his two roles within the university. So to come back to your question, James, about reputation, within that context you can see that actually the goals of the centre, I think, are fairly well established as being around policy choice and providing some, I suppose, analysis of policy choice options available to governments. And Bjorn Lomborg's connection with the university is as one of the more than 1,000 adjuncts we have, not a member of staff, not an academic in the university, but an adjunct. If that had been represented appropriately, I don't think there would have been the same amount of discussion about this particular initiative, because it's an initiative of the university. There will be, I should say, there will be a director of the Australia Consensus Centre, not yet advertised or appointed. That person would report through to the Dean of the Business School, because it would be a centre located in the business school. So it is difficult, as we would all know, it is difficult to manage an issue when it runs wildly, either in social media or in the published media. But I think, as you would have seen, there have been some pieces in the conversation and in the published media that have been better informed, and discussion that is well informed. I think in the university we're all committed to discussion that is well informed. Let's have the facts there, and let's try to get the facts out. And in that way, I think we can, in a sense, promote what we do best at in the university, that is, address some of the really big issues that society faces, and do so in a calculating and dispassionate manner.
Deborah?
Hi, Deborah McDougall. I'm in anthropology and social sciences, and as you know, we have a new MA in international development that goes across the faculties. So given that this Consensus Centre is centrally about development, I'd like to know who you or others in the executive making this decision of our world-renowned experts on development and development study, who's been consulted around the decision to bring this very controversial figure to the university. Thanks.
I can say no one in anthropology. The discussions, because this is
social sciences and the sciences.
Okay, so this is essentially an economic centre, because it's applying an economic methodology, which at heart is cost-benefit analysis. So it's around public choice and cost-benefit analysis, and that's work that largely rests within the business school. And so the discussions were with Phil Dolan as Dean of Business, and with Paul Flatto, Director of the Centre for Social Impact, because that's a centre that very much uses an evaluative mechanism, an economic evaluative methodology, I suppose, to determine how best to get good policy implemented. So that was the process. I mean, you will be aware that when we are discussing opportunities with potential funders, and they come from all quarters, they may be philanthropic, they may be government, they may be industry, they may be NGOs, we have to carry those discussions forward with a degree of confidentiality, but we also try to discuss with relevant people in the university. In this case, it was going to be a centre that's in the business school, and the appropriate discussions with the Dean of Business, who then also, I believe, shared this with the management group of the business school.
Jay?
Jamie O'Shea. I'm an academic, a scientist in animal biology. I'm also president of the NTU, so I disclose those affiliations. The allocation of $4 million to the centre with Bjorn Lomborg has emerged as another one of the captain's picks that Tony had in consultation with Peter Craig. The university on the East Coast, I know, would have preferred locations. I don't know how many of them knocked this back. I'd like to know how much political pressure was applied to our university, and I know this is a political question. I put aside the problems of science and the loss of reputation here, but how much political pressure was applied to our university, local and or national, to get us to accept this gift?
There wasn't political pressure. It was let me say, I've no idea what discussions the government had with other universities or organisations. I just don't know. The government got in touch with this university, I think it was in late August last year. There was a possibility. We discussed it with the business school and the Centre for Social Impact. It hasn't actually been set up within the Centre for Social Impact, but as a separate unit within the business school. And we looked at the opportunities that this would bring to undertake some of the sort of work that we try to do in universities, and that is work around policy issues. That's particularly something that is done in business schools around the country, so it seemed to be consistent with the work of the business school. But in terms of political pressures, no, there wasn't.
Hi, I guess I have a couple of, my name's Eric Feinblatt. I'm an adjunct here, actually an honorary research fellow at the university. I want to piggyback a little bit on what James said, and that has to do with the question of perception. I don't know that you actually responded to what he said about reputation. This initiative was undertaken by the Abbott government, which dangled $4 million in front of, I guess, the University of Western Australia, which must have seemed very appealing. You've made yourself quite clear about being sensitive to financial issues, deregulation being one of them. You've commented a lot about that. The perception is that you bought into this because the money was there. We clearly need the money, the university. Governments don't usually fund research centers unless they think they're going to get something out of those research centers. Clearly, this approach is an approach which aligns itself nicely with Abbott and Julie Bishop's policies vis-a-vis development. They are not going to be here forever. I would wonder what this institution is, what this research center is going to look like when its research is not going to be able to support something that right now is the main focus of the development policies of the government that is in power at the moment. Last week, The Guardian, I don't know whether you noticed, The Guardian ran a story about, right after the meeting that we had here. Piggyback to that story, there was another one, a gathering of Nobel Prize winners in Hong Kong at a sustainability conference. Now, these were economists, they were health professionals, they were scientists, and what they said was that Australia right now is public enemy, I quote, public enemy #1 in the world in relation to the upcoming Paris meeting, UN meeting in the environment. And they cited this center as one of the reasons why, as exemplifying why Australia is public enemy #1. Now, these are perceptions that I'll cut it short. Nobel Prize laureates have about this center, about the relationship of the university to this center and its ties to the Abbott government. And I'd like you to address that specifically.
Okay, so just by way of a comment at the beginning, it's interesting, isn't it, that in 2008, The Guardian listed Bjorn Lomborg as one of the 50 people active in discussions about the planet's future, who one of the 50 people most likely to save humanity in terms of action on climate change. So I just want to make that point. Opinions vary, and even on the same individual, they change from time to time. But the core issue you asked about is government funding. This funding is what in the terms of our reporting to government, this would be Category 2 funding. This is government funding, but it's non-competitive. It's the way in which most, or many, probably most centres, subject-specific centres across Australian universities have been funded. And if you look across them, the Grattan Institute, the Whitlam Centre, the Indonesia Centre at Monash, the India Centre at Melbourne, the Rudd's Big Bung for the ANU and the China Studies Centre when he was in government, the Tropical Medicine Research Institute at James Cook University, the Centre for Social Impact at the University of New South Wales, the major hub of it, the US Studies Centre at the University of Sydney. These have all been funded in that way. So whether we like it or not, the reality is governments, this one, the Gillard government, which actually funded our Perth US Asia Centre here, the Rudd government, and the Howard government before that. I don't know, probably before the Howard government, so those go back a long way, don't they? But governments have consistently decided to fund centres of activity in universities across the country. There's nothing unusual about this. Now, we may say as an academic community, we think all that funding should go through a peer review process, through ARC or NHMRC. But the reality is, it never has done, and I suspect it never will. And most of these centres that have been funded, there are other things that have been funded. The conversation, for instance, was funded in a similar way. I suspect governments will continue to do that. Politicians like to be able to put leaders. In terms of Australia's position as, and let me say, this is a centre about global development, 18 different issues. It's not a centre about climate change. Perhaps I should say the high-level panel that was considering what these 18 issues should be said climate change needs to be one of them. You will all, I'm sure, know that climate change is not currently one of the 10 issues that was identified by the United Nations in their Millennium Development Goals. They didn't put climate change in. This high-level panel, the Copenhagen Consensus Centre, said climate change, energy and biodiversity and air pollution are 4 issues that all need to be in there because they're 4 of the biggest issues facing the world over the next 15 years.
Hi, yeah, I've got a question. My question is more why Lomborg? I mean, aren't there any less controversial figures to be part of the centre that you guys can start?
Okay, so good question. Lomborg, through the Copenhagen Consensus Centre, has developed both, I would say, has refined an approach to meta-analysis and cost-benefit analysis of the economic impact of public policy, particularly in the area of development. So there is now a group of close to 100 academics that have been working with the Copenhagen Consensus Centre to look at these 18 development opportunities. What we would do here is, in a sense, borrow much of that set of connections of people who are already doing work around the meta-analysis on these development goals. Let me say, it's quite, in many areas it's quite constrained. If you take, you can look at all this on the Copenhagen Consensus website, if you, for the post-2015 development goals, if you take something like biodiversity, so it said biodiversity is a very big area. Let's go out to someone to write an analysis of what we know about the return to investment in protecting biodiversity. Crucial given that there's been so much species loss over the last 50 years. So the person, I don't know him, the person who's written this paper is a someone who's done work for the IPCC. And he said, well, how do we define policy action on biodiversity? There is a statement, the Aichi statement from a meeting in Tokyo, that has about 20 different goals. And he's looked at that and he says, well, about 9 of these, I forget the numbers exactly, 9 of these aren't really about spending money, they're about organisation, about government commitments and so on. The rest do involve some policy action that involves resources, funds. But of those, only 4 of them, on only 4 of them, is there any existing evidence in the published literature about the value, the return on investment. So there are some where potentially you could do this work, but it hasn't been done. There are others, and they cover coral reefs, forests, wetlands, environmental protection to preserve biodiversity in grasslands and so on. So what does the evidence show? And the guy who's written the initial paper says it is overwhelming. The number one thing that we should be spending our money on is protection of coral reefs, because that gives a return of $100 and something per dollar spent. and then the next one is forests, and the next one is wetlands. And the two academics who critique this say, well, actually, we don't fully agree with his interpretation of the data and the method and so on. We still agree coral reefs come absolutely at the top, but the return on dollars spent is $46, not 136. So they get the same rank ordering, but not the same number. So, you know, that's the approach that they take. These are people who are already working on these sorts of issues. Now, as I say, there will be a new set of issues once the United Nations determines what its development goals actually were. That's for the United Nations to determine, not anyone else. Then there is the issue, okay, if the United Nations says biodiversity is the #1 issue, how do we target resources on that? Because if you don't have agreement about how resources are targeted, different governments will go off and do different things. The United States will say, well, we're putting our aid budget into this, and the EU will put it into that, and Australia's small aid budget will go into something else. And we will end up with dissipated effort and suboptimal impact in trying to address some of these big issues. So that's why Lomborg is important, because of the connections it brings.
Still in the back.
Following on from the last question, was it a condition of the government funding that Lomborg was involved?
It wasn't a condition, I think, of the government funding. It was something that we said as a university, if we don't have these connections with the Copenhagen Consensus Centre, we can't do this for $4 million. We can't start from zero and try to build all these connections. I mean, it's a group of, you know, close to 100, mainly economists but also epidemiologists, public health people, and so on. Yeah, and they are from around the world. 8 of them from Harvard and McGill and Toronto, and, you know, all sorts of places. It takes a lot of time to put that together. So it's an issue of practicality. Can you do this? Yeah. If it was $40 million, that's great. Let's start out from a blank sheet of paper, but not otherwise.
Was Lomborg a suggestion of the government or of the university?
Lomborg was a suggestion of the government that this is someone who could facilitate work.
Hello. Hi, Paul. Thank you very much for coming. And I tried to come the other day, but it was full. My name is Val Wilson. I'm Professor of Science Education in the Faculty of Education. And when this story broke, I was in the US giving 2 papers, one on Australian students' understandings of climate change science, and the second one giving a report on a UNESCO-funded development project in Indonesia and India. So I was quite caught out and a little embarrassed, and people saying, oh, you know, what are you doing? You know, what's your university doing? And I then came back jet-lagged to go into my class, where I have several students who are members of the Australian Youth Climate Coalition. And my question is really around the message to students. I actually let them speak to the class. We had a conversation. At that stage, we didn't know very much. One of them, you're probably aware, has set up a petition on change.org. Related to that, it's now filtered down to our Science Teachers Association listserv, and this morning, because I'm a fellow of the Society of Biology, their latest list of things to read also has an article from The Guardian related to this. So I guess in going forward, the question is, how can people like myself and also, you know, others who are involved in this area, how can we, you know, be involved in this conversation? Because what I do try and do around climate change science education is promote tolerance, diversity of views, multiple perspectives. So yeah, how can we be included, including students?
Well, I think we need to talk, and we need to talk openly and frankly. Though let me say, I think there are some limits to that, because one of those limits is that I would reject, and I would hope everyone in the university would reject, the challenges from climate change deniers who say the climate isn't changing, we don't have anything to worry about. I mean, there is, as far as I understand it, there is no scientific evidence to support that proposition. Absolutely none. So, and though we and indeed, some of you will be aware that one of our academic colleagues here, in the past, at least one, has received vicious and continuing attacks
I have as well.
from climate change deniers.
It's the norm.
And I have taken the view, and I have directly responded to these people saying their critiques and attacks are vexatious. We will not respond from the university because they are frankly they're mad. But within the broad area, yes, we know that climate is changing. We know it's changing. I would say, as an economic historian, because that's the only qualification I have in any of anything to do with climate. It's clear that in about 1700, the world shifted from being focused entirely on renewable energy to having non-renewable energy, because that's when coal started to be used. And indeed, that's when you see big changes in Europe and in other countries. And we have been consuming carbon resources and putting carbon out into the atmosphere in ever-growing quantities since then, and the climate has been warming. Now, there is certainly a statistical correlation between those two. I couldn't say what the complex lines of causation are, but it's that correlation is certainly there. The challenge, I think, in the policy space is how do we respond to this? And there are multiple things we could do. One of them, there was a piece on the radio this morning, okay, was a very practical thing here in Australia. The government needs to take on the big miners and sweep away the subsidy the big miners get for diesel. And that would save us billions of dollars a year, which could be channeled into other climate change. That's what the policy analysis gets down to. What can governments actually do to have an impact? And that's what we need to focus on. And there is no one answer. There are no 10 answers. There are multiple possibilities. And that's where, within the academy, it seems to me, we should be engaging in that discussion. We should be getting our students to engage in that discussion. But we should also be recognising that there is no single answer. If there was a single answer, if this was a simple question, it would have been solved. The answer would have been delivered, it would be done, like that. It is the complexity that requires our engagement.
Okay, to start, I think, on this occasion, I think it's an appropriate student voice we heard. So,
Hi, my name is Lizzie O'Shea. I know you quite well. I'm the guild president. For the purposes of the room, I have been a student, I've been a staff member, I'm now a graduate. I've never received so much support for literally anything I've ever done as it was when we took a stance against this Bjorn Lomborg decision. I've received information from people that they're no longer leaving money to UWA in their will because this decision is even being played around. So to use some of your terminology, whether we like it or not, the reality is that the damage is there and the damage is being done. And I would like you to specifically address, if you are going to follow through with this, how you're going to address this damage that has already been done, like we had a question earlier, to the individual reputation of everyone in this room. My entire CV says UWA all over it. But also, as our VC, if the students don't want it, and if the staff don't want it, and if the graduates don't want it, how do you justify the decision if you're meant to be our Vice Chancellor, if no one wants
So I would respond by saying, why don't you want your university to be engaged in discussions of some of the most important issues that face the world?
I think I would say we have no issue with the discussions being had, it's that they're being had with Lomborg and that it's $4 million being given specifically.
All right, so let me then go on to say, what is it about Lomborg that you believe should be silenced? No, that you believe should be silenced in this university?
I think the fact that we've had people come out and critique, so we saw, everyone's saying the H index of 3 and people are saying it's actually higher, it's actually 14. That higher H index is because people are counting citations from his non-peer-reviewed book. That is all opinion that all of the references have been refuted. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but that's what I've understood. So the issue is that we're being given this centre specifically with Lomborg, we're being given this sort of, people will argue, like we've heard a number of times, it's like ideologically allocated funding, and that UWA were the only ones who would take it. I'm not sure what advice was had on the decision being made, but what I'm getting from people is they don't want to see their university being the last refuge for Lomborg in this country when he's been said, everyone else has said no to him and everyone else has kicked him out.
Well, actually, Phil, you sent me a couple of emails this morning about Lomborg and what he'd been doing in the US this week and last. So
he addressed the Green Initiative at Harvard University last week.
Do you want to stand up?
But also, I think people want to hear less from me and more from you on this one.
Okay, just a couple of things that have happened in the last week. Lomborg addressed the Green Initiative at Harvard University, where he also met with 15 finance ministers from around the world to discuss exactly these issues. So I think we know the difference between a traditional academic appointment and an adjunct. People outside perhaps don't do that and might just see professor at UWA and interpret that differently to how people who know more would do. But the intention is not that he's taking a traditional academic appointment. We appoint adjuncts all the time, and we typically don't, in the business school at least, we don't look at their research record. We appoint them for other reasons. So it was news to me what his H index was. I didn't even look it up because it wouldn't have been relevant to the discussion at this point.
Just to Krishna and then the gentleman over there and then this gentleman.
I generally agree with Lizzie, so I say this with a degree of hesitation. An H index of 4 in a social scientist is not very low, so I don't think we ought to get hung up on that H index. If all of us were asked to show our H index, many of us would fall below that. So don't ask too many questions about professorial H indexes. The other thing that's slightly problematic in this discussion, Paul, for all of us, is we're getting a little bit muddled about the source of the funding and the rest of the issue around ideological issues around Lomborg. So I'm a little bit disconcerted to find that there is so much anxiety about the $4 million that has come from the government. I'm not sure if my colleagues know, but as a former ARC insider, I think it needs to be said that the ARC dispenses something around 11% of the total government funding that is given out for research. I don't know how much the NHMRC dispenses, probably a little bit more than that, but let's say twice that. It would still be that competitive funding only accounts for 30% of government funding. It is the policy of almost every GO8 now to go out and get more Category 2 funding, a lot of which is not competitive. I think we need to separate the issues.
Just by point of reference, point of information, probably the biggest chunk of that discretionary Category 2 funding that's come our way indirectly is the government's funding for the Harry Perkins Research Institute, which was through an entirely non-competitive process.
Sorry.
Vice-Chancellor, my name is Mark Hurlstone. I'm a researcher in the School of Psychology. I joined this university 3 years ago to work with Professor Steve Lewandowski on the science of climate change denial. Having devoted 3 years of my life to researching that, I know the distinction between scepticism and denial. At the last meeting we said that Lomborg isn't a denier. I would argue that he is a denier. It's just his denialism is more subtle than the kind of things that we read in the newspaper columns for this room. The evidence for that is, over the past 15 years, he has repeatedly cherry-picked the data. He's repeatedly cherry-picked it in order to advance his particular position on climate change. And despite the fact that he's neither an economist nor a climate scientist, he's playing out both of those roles in the public sphere. There's little doubt to me that he is a denier. And this is not a skeptic. The skeptic takes into account the full body of data and formulates his or her opinion on the basis of the full array of data. That is not what Bjorn Lomborg has been doing. Now, the psychology behind this is very straightforward. If we have a group of rational people, and I say that climate change isn't happening, it's not real, you won't have any interest in what I have to say. But if I can agree with you if I can say, okay, I agree that it's a problem that needs to be tackled, I've got a foot in the door. Yeah. So then all I need to do is to try and downplay it and give you reasons to try and downplay also. Appealing to energy poverty, for example. This is the kind of approach that Lomborg has pioneered, and it's the approach that the fossil fuel industry is now using. Right? Instead of outrightly denying that climate change is happening, they have repositioned themselves, both in America and in Australia in recent years, by appealing to the good that fossil fuels can do to alleviate energy poverty in developing nations. That's my opinion. It's backed up by many other academics who are working in this particular area. The evidence is out there, yeah. The comments are there, we can see the cherry picking in action. That's not the actions of the skeptic, it's the actions of the denier. Getting to my question is this. This centre may produce some good, yeah. But is the good that comes from the centre going to outweigh the severe damage that it will cause to our reputation?
Well, can I just... I think you have your interpretation of sort of words and actions. But I mean, Lomborg, I don't want to be an apologist for Lomborg. He's a very effective, he can do that himself. But he is on the record time and time again saying climate change is real, its causes are anthropogenic, and it needs action against it. What he then does is say, well, let's look at the economics of this. There are many, we could throw a lot of money at something now, or at one thing. We could throw it at lots of different things because we're not sure what will work. We could do some of it now and possibly some of it later because we might get a bigger impact later. Let me give an analogy around this. And let me do this because it is clear that renewable energy costs are falling because both because the scale of production of the technology is rising, the technology is so expensive, and other than oil prices, it seems to be costs for fossil fuel energy production isn't particularly falling. I mean, it has done in the States, but the share of gas technology as well. So the gap between those two, or the relativities, is changing. The question is, how much do we invest, and this is how Lomborg put it, how much do we invest in renewables now, as opposed to 3 years or 5 years down the line? Because if you invest now, you lock into a technology, maybe better 3 years, maybe 5 years. But at some point you have to invest. It's a bit like saying, I'm sitting at home with my very old-fashioned TV, and I know that there are these nice big flat screen TVs out there in the market, but I know the price of those TVs falls year on year. So do I say I'm never going to get one until the price falls to zero, in which case I will never enjoy a big widescreen TV? Do I say I'm going to buy one now, because then I can enjoy it but at a high price, or do I wait a year, and so on? And actually what a lot of people say is, well, I'll buy one now because I want it. What I won't do is buy 3 now, because the one I'm buying and using will eventually pack up and then I'll use the next one. I'll actually buy one, wait until I've used that, the price will come down, then I'll buy the next one, which will be even bigger and even cheaper. Okay, that's about choice about maximising the efficiency of your resources. That's what the methodology is involved in. It's about choice.
Why does that analogy seem so simple-minded in the face of such deep problems? His methodology is not cost-benefit analysis. That's a tool. His methodology is to reduce the scope of the problem, to reduce the impact of the problem, and to reduce the ramifications of the problem. And then, once he has something manageable, what he does is he takes a tool and he focuses that tool on the problem and tries to make some mechanistic solution to a very large problem. That analogy is a perfect example of that.
Can we just take another question? And I think that's a statement rather than a question, so we'll respond to this gentleman over here. And then I think there'll be 2 more questions today.
Hi, I'm Gerhard Moyer. I'm a professor at the International Center of Radio Astronomic Research. My question is basically whether this is indeed in that class. We're talking about $4 million coming in, but and I guess I also address the cost. But there's the in-kind contributions, which I think are supposed to be like 12 million.
Oh no. The in-kind contribution is space, IT, telephony. That's what's
But meanwhile, we've been talking about the damage to the university and reputation, and we're cutting back on things like I'm a graduate research coordinator on completion scholarships, for example, and it just seems that I don't see this as necessarily that plus for the university.
This isn't $4 million that would go to something else. It's $4 million to support the centre. It has to be self-financed. So that just be my comment. Just, I know a lot of other people, I'll just take 2 more questions, but just to reassure you, what we might do, and here I'm putting it all on the spot, but we also might take some written questions later, and there's also the record of proceedings, so this won't, you know, the Vice Chancellor, I must say, has been very good in coming and taking all questions without notice, so, but there are students waiting at the door, the Americans at the gate, so we just take it.
Vice Chancellor Dave Webb from the Business School. First of all, I'm not an environmental scientist. I have what I would describe as a layperson's knowledge in respect to environmental issues and sustainability. Now, it seems that a lot of the argument that you've been sort of proposing or pushing is that the centre will not directly be involved in climate change issues. Now, of course, that sort of is contradicted historically by the past record of the Copenhagen Consensus Centre, both in the views that have been promoted and also the research conducted specifically in respect to an alternative which might have to do with geoengineering-based solutions. Of course, there are not only ethical questions associated with geoengineering, but also questions of sustainability in respect to social and natural environment impacts. Now, with that as a backdrop, in the 20th of April UWA news piece, Establishment of ACC, in addition to the 3 primary projects, there is an additional paragraph which reads other activities of the ECC, and as part of that, there is the suggestion that opportunities and challenges around a number of other areas exist, including climate resilience and technology exchange. What is meant by climate resilience? And secondly, how does an economics-based methodology tackle that particular issue? And thirdly, what are the guarantees that if the United Nations suddenly decides that climate change is now a pressing issue, that the Consensus Centre will not promote a particular view that might not be consistent with many others at the university?
So, to start with the last bit, on the Consensus Centre, let me emphasise, there is a director to be appointed. It will be work run, that director will report through to the Dean of the Business School. This is not work that Lomborg does. Actually, I don't think he does any research. I mean, the Copenhagen Consensus Centre. Because the role of the Copenhagen Consensus Centre is, in a sense, is to commission research. Look at the website, see how they do that. Commission research and publish it. So none of this is done in a veiled or secret way. In that sense, it's a good model of how to put information in the public domain. Let's have an open debate, put it out there on the web, and deliberately get contrarian views and academic critiques of the material. So that, that's in a sense the control mechanism is that it's located in the business school with a director who will be appointed, no advertisements being made, and so on. In terms of other things that the centre might do, the centre is, it has any funding contract with the government. Those of you who've ever had these things know that there are a number of milestones. So it's the post-2015 development goals. It's an Australian series of development goals. There are some other opportunities, possibilities if additional funds are procured, and the top one is to look at agriculture, particularly across the Asian region, and to see what the opportunities and the challenges are for managing the agricultural productivity within the region to meet the challenge of increasing population, and particularly the shift towards more protein content diets in many Southeast Asian countries. So that's the next goal.
Hi, I'm Genevieve Simpson and I'm one of the representatives from the Postgraduate Students Association. I have more of a kind of a practical question to ask. There's been a lot of discussion around Lomborg and the other section being kind of the funding for the centre itself. But what ties the two together is this methodology. And you've spoken about the importance of the methodology as part of the process, and the fact that we need Bjorn Lomborg to have the methodology, and also that we need...
To have the connections, I think the methodology is, in a sense, abstract and generally available.
Well, I think that will be even more important in my question, considering we know that both the methodology itself has been questioned today and in the literature, and the use of the network itself, the people that Lomborg contracts to be the decision makers. That was contradicted last week when it was found out, someone mentioned that there were no climate economists included in the decision-making process. Will we have to adopt the methodology and the connections in their entirety? Will this happen in a closed box in the centre, or will the methodology and the connections be up for discussion, allowing the community as a whole to not only have influence but also potentially expose some of Lomborg's previous expressions?
It's all transparent. It's there on the web. Go and have a look at it. My understanding in terms of the post-2015 my understanding is that there are 80 odd economists there from universities all around the world. There are a whole load of interest groups, Overseas Development Institute, United Nations institutes, and so on, who have an input. I would make no comment about those from NGOs, from universities, from government departments, from United Nations bodies who are contributing to that discussion. I imagine, since they have been invited to do so, that they believe contributing to that discussion is worthwhile. I'm certainly not going to impugn either the motives of the academic credentials of any of those people. A quick glance through the website would indicate to me that they have claims to expertise in their field, but it would be for people in each field to take a view on that. So it is absolutely open, transparent, it's there, it is designed to promote discussion. It is the antithesis of a closed decision-making body. And it's not a decision-making body, it's about saying, here are some ideas, can we take them out to the world? Can we take them out in particular to policymakers, who ultimately, whether we like it or not, are going to have to take decisions about how to spend our dollars.
Thank you very much, Senator. I think the conversation will continue, the dialogue. I think we've exhausted the utility of this kind of a forum. I think maybe we'll have a different sort of conversation by questions. And that's something that the Staff Association will facilitate. I hope many of you will now join the Staff Association. Can you join me now in thanking the questioners and also the